welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea from Game Informer, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. 2022 is officially coming to a close, and as we reach the end of the year, it's time to do what every other podcast under the sun is doing and look back at the year that was. Just like last year, I'm going to host a bit of an award show through this episode of All Things Nintendo. This is the second annual All Things Nintendo Awards. Last year, I invited a rotating cast of guests on to talk about why the winners deserve to be selected, but that was an absolute logistical nightmare. So this time, I'm just sticking with the one, the only, my ride or die for this episode, Mr. Kyle Hilliard. Kyle, how's it going today? Are you ready to wrap up 2022 in style?
Good. Yes. Did I answer those questions?
You answered those questions, not with style, but with gravitas.
Right. That's all right. So I nailed it, is what you're saying.
Yes, you nailed it. I do want to clarify before we start, these are not the official Game Informer awards for the end of the year. If you want to check those out, you can either wait for our next issue to hit your mailbox or go to GameInformer.com in the coming weeks. Right now, you can actually go on GameInformer.com and you can see our top 10 games of 2022. We will have more specific awards in the future. These awards that I'm going through today are specific to all things Nintendo, and as such, you might hear about games that came out last year, but as long as they hit Switch in 2022, they qualify. So, Kyle, here's how it's going to work. I'm going to list off nominees for each category. Then once I announce the winner, I will be talking to you about why we think the winner is deserving. So,
Got it.
Just kind of, reminiscing a little bit on 2022. I think it was a bit of an outlier in that it received a ton of amazing games, but I think that probably the two best games in a lot of people's eyes, Elden Ring and God of War Ragnarok, didn't come to Switch. And that's kind of an interesting thing, because in the past years, like, it's either been like a multi-platform game that has arrived on Switch, or like, a Switch game has been a contender, as was the case in 2017 when we gave it to Breath of the Wild. And it's interesting that, like, those are kind of the consensus two best games of the year. And they also happen to be the top two games on Game Informer's top 10 games, the official Game Informer Award. So go check that out if you want. But Kyle, what does that mean to you that, like, the best two games that I think in almost everybody who played them's eyes aren't on Switch? Like, does that mean that Switch had kind of a down year, or does that mean that, like, it was more of like a kind of like every other system had a good year?
I think it's a sign that we've been seeing for years now that the hardware is really falling behind. Honestly, like, I think there's lots of great games still on Switch, and I don't think I had a bad year by any means, but like, it's getting old, man. It's like I'm ready for some new hardware, and I think this year is kind of a sign of that. I mean, God of War was never going to appear on Switch, but I mean, Elden Ring, like, it would have been nice to have a new Switch with Elden Ring on it. I mean, I guess that's my Steam Deck, but, I guess that sort of accentuates the point even more, right?
Yeah, now there's a Steam Deck that can run things like that. And I mean, I'm assuming you've played Elden Ring on your Steam Deck, correct?
No, actually, I haven't.
Oh.
I played on PlayStation 5, and that was plenty for me.
I'm assuming it runs well on the Steam Deck.
Yeah, it runs well, because it sort of came out around the same time the Steam Deck launched, and I think Valve was even, like, particularly focused on it to be like, all right, well, this is everyone's favorite game right now. Like, we need and this is what people are playing on the Steam Deck. We need to make sure it runs well. So I think it is pretty solid.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, that has to kind of give some sort of, I guess, light a fire under Nintendo to kind of be like, hey, like, Valve is doing like a more powerful version of what you're doing. Maybe you should look into that, because you are missing out on games like Elden Ring. And then you look at a game like Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which, we're going to be celebrating through the vast majority of this episode. But I think it's safe to say Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, a lot less graphically demanding than Elden Ring, and ran significantly worse than Elden Ring.
I mean, my hope, because Nintendo's never really one to, like, look at competition, right? They're not really looking at Elden Ring probably and feeling like, oh, we missed out. We could have had Elden Ring on our system. They probably don't feel that way, but I think looking at something like Pokemon, I think that makes them hopefully be a little more wary of their hardware limitations.
For sure. But again, this is meant to be a celebratory episode, and you said it yourself. The Switch had a very good year, regardless of missing out on, I think, the consensus top two games. which is why I wanted to do this for the second year in a row, celebrating the best of the year. So without further ado, Kyle, let's get started. Are you ready for the first category?
Let's do it. These are all a mystery to me. I'm excited to find out what these are all going to be.
So the first category, Kyle, what does it mean to you to have a best action game? Like what are kind of like the check boxes that you look for when it comes to an action game to like rise to the top of the genre, which is such like a broad category?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, good combat immediately comes to mind, but it does encompass more than that, I feel like.
Well, we have plenty of good combat in this category, but also some kind of you'll see what I mean when I say it's a broad-reaching category here. So here are the 5 nominees that we have here on All Things Nintendo for the first category, which is Best Action Game. First up, Bayonetta 3, then Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Neon White, Sonic Frontiers, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge.
God, this is already a sign to me. It's like, man, see, Switch did have a solid year. Like, these are all great games.
They are. And the winner in Best Action Game for All Things Nintendo 2022 is Kirby and the Forgotten Land. All right, so Kyle,
and I want to make this clear, by the way. This was not a democratic process. Like, Shay, these are yours, right? I have no say in who's winning any of these things.
I am the host of All Things Nintendo. Kyle, you are just along for the ride of this episode. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to me about why Kirby and the Forgotten Land. You've played this, correct?
Yeah, I like Kirby a lot. I think it'll probably be on my personal top 10, which I didn't really expect. I've played almost every Kirby of like the last 8 or 10 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And they've always been like fine. It's like, they're just charming little platformers, kind of forgettable. They're like candy, you just sort of consume them and move on. And I went into Forgotten Land assuming it would kind of be like that, and walked away being like, that was my favorite Kirby I've ever played, period. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that was kind of my sense as well. And I remember watching it and being like, oh, they're kind of like doing like the Super Mario Odyssey thing with Kirby. And then once I got my hands on it, I was like, oh, no, this is more Mario 3D World than Mario Odyssey. And I think that well,
it's
really
Kirby,
well.
though. He's always like inhaled, abilities, right? Is that what you mean by Odyssey? Like stealing abilities from enemies?
Well, it was kind of like, you're going to these different areas. It almost had like a post-apocalyptic vibe. You're collecting these characters and like helping like all these like different like characters build up the town and everything. Like, I don't know, like there were parts of it that reminded me of Super Mario Odyssey, and also like the early trailers almost reminded me of like kind of like the hub areas of Mario Odyssey, like the kingdoms. But I didn't realize until much later that they were linear in fashion instead of kind of open world going around and like, like Mario Odyssey, Super Mario 64 style, where you're dumped into a giant playground and you have different objectives you can complete. That's what I kind of thought it was from those early trailers.
Right.
But there's a defined start and defined end point for these levels, which I think plays really well into the Kirby formula of being able to acquire these different abilities and take on these kind of fun, like over the top boss battles. It works so well. And I'm right there with you. I think Kirby and the Forgotten Land is my favorite Kirby game ever. And I've played a decent amount of them.
Yeah, I think without question. Yeah. Best one.
So that is why it wins Best Action Game. Kyle, we're going to move on to the next category, which is a hotly contested one, I think. That is the Best RPG. So this is maybe the most competitive category out of all the genres here and all the individual categories, but there are also some pretty hotly contested ones later. So stick around. And I guess let's just jump right in. Here are the nominees for Best RPG. You have Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope, which, kind of a smudging there, but like I would say it's more strategy than RPG, but it fits.
Yeah, strategy RPG. Yeah.
Pokemon Legends Arceus, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Triangle Strategy, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And the winner is Xenoblade Chronicles 3. All right, Kyle, so I'm going to need your help with this one because I've actually not had a chance to play Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and from all indications, it is a beloved title on social media. I see a very, very enthusiastic fan base. I see all of the RPG lovers just kind of obsessing over this game. You've played more of it than I have, so talk to me about why this game is so good.
Yeah, so I started it recently, and my history with Xenoblade is always, I remember I played the first one. I played the new, one of the few exclusive new 3DS games, Xenoblade Chronicles. And I took it on a flight. So I played it. I was like, this is going to lock me in. I'm going to play it for like an uninterrupted, like 3 or 4 hours. And I did. And like after that flight, I was like, I think I'm good. I don't think I really need to go back. It just didn't click with me. And then 2 came out. I skipped X. And then 2 came out, and I played it for like 8 hours. Like, I really gave it a real shot. I was like, I'm going to try to let it get its story hooks into me. I'm going to try to like understand the combat. And again, after like I hit a point where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm going to move on with my life. And then now I'm playing 3, and like it finally has clicked. Like like very quickly, I was like, ooh. I put it away for the night, and the next day I was like, I want to get back to that. Like, I was really digging that. Like, okay, so the basic setup, and this is like, I almost wouldn't count this as a spoiler because it is one of the things I learned that kind of got me excited to try it. And it's like, the first hour of the game sort of explains this of like an 80-hour game. So very small percentage, but basically everyone in the world of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, you're born basically as like a late teenager. You're like 20 years old, which is obviously not a teenager, but you're born at about 20 years old and you live for 10 years, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's just life. You have a 10-year lifespan. That is how that world functions. And just that basic core idea, it like is really fascinating and leads to like really interesting story and character relationships, because like everyone just has a deadline on their life, and like, how do you deal with that? And why is everyone using that time to just be at war?
Mm-hmm.
And from what I understand, it gets even more interesting after that. But just that basic idea is really exciting. And then the combat, which isn't like radically different from the previous games, as far as I know, for some reason it's just clicking with me this time. I just like, I'm getting it. I'm enjoying it. Like I'm in. Like, I'm having a good time with it, and I'm excited to keep going with it.
And Kyle was a little bit of a liar at the start of the show. He said he had no insight into any of these awards. This is actually one award I went to him because I knew he had played Xenoblade Chronicles 3. And I said, all right, here are the options. What should win? And you said, oh, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. So I'm glad that I deferred to somebody who had played it. But I've talked a lot about
Hey, Shay, real quick, is there anything else you want to throw me under the bus for?
Well, you also lied to my face the other... No, I'm just kidding. This is actually something where I've talked a lot about how the eShop Gem of the Week is one of those segments that just gets me financially in trouble, because like everybody brings like their lesser known games that I've never heard of and tells me like, oh, you should absolutely play this game. It gives me like the full on sales pitch. And then I end up adding it to my wish list or buying it or whatever. And then, yeah, it's just, it's a mess, and it's a disaster for my wallet, a disaster for my backlog. You talking about it just now has made me want to buy Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and finally give it like the old college try, because everybody has been telling me over and over again how good this game is. Our reviewer at Game Informer didn't love it as much as everybody else. So like when I had
Jason, right? Jason Guiso,
he didn't love it as much as everybody else. So when I had him on the show to give his review, I was like, oh, okay, like I can probably skip this one. But seeing kind of the groundswell of enthusiasm of Xenoblade Chronicles 3, it was just, it's becoming overwhelming. And it's like, all right, well, if I'm going to host a Nintendo podcast, I need to know what this game is about, because everybody's talking about how it's one of the best games of the year. And I finally, while you were giving me that explanation and kind of selling me on this, I opened up the eShop page, and I'm planning on buying it after this episode because it just has to be done at this point, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if any of them, at least from my limited experience, like this is the one where it seems like they got, at least the early part of the game down of like, hey, interesting premise, interesting combat, let's go. Where maybe the other 2 or 3 were like a tough ramp up.
Mhm. All right. Well, I appreciate you telling me about why this game rules, because it's one of the only games on this in this award show that I haven't played that's going to win an award. So, thanks again, Kyle, and we're going to move on to the next category, and that is best sports or racing game. So, this is one that I kind of went back and forth on. Like, all right, do we delete this category? Do we keep it? Do we just I didn't know what to do with this one. And then the more I looked at it, the more I was like, we actually have a lot of games that could be included in this category. So here are the nominations or the nominees: Chocobo GP, Mario Strikers Battle League, Nintendo Switch Sports, Retro Bowl, and Retro Goal. And I did catch that chuckle on Chocobo GP. It is. I actually haven't played that one, but it is a.
It's not even. I don't. From what I understand, it's like a fine game. The chuckle is just like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that game.
I think a lot of people forgot about that game. But the winner is Retro Bowl.
This sounds made up, Brian Shea.
So Retro Bowl, Kyle. This is. Did you ever play like the Tecmo Bowl games back in the day?
No, I did not.
Okay, so they're these beloved, basically side-scrolling football games. Like basically you think of like a modern American football game, like Madden. The camera's behind the quarterback, so you can get a great view of like the players and like who's running routes, what the defense is doing. Retro Bowl, much like its sister game Retro Goal, which is by the same developer, both of them hit Switch this year. Retro Bowl hit early this year. Retro Goal hit just last month. They're both actually previously mobile titles, but they were retrofitted for the Switch, and they're homages to the old games like the NES and SNES era of these sports titles. And so it's a side-scrolling football game, and it actually featured both of these on the eShop Gems of the Year just last week. And you play on offense, and you throw the ball and they catch it and run it. So it's very simple. You can either hand off or execute the play that is given to you, and then you only play on offense. But that's not the main meat of this game. It's actually like a management sim where you're a manager. You come into the football team, you're head coach or whatever the position is they give you, and you manage your team throughout various seasons. And it's basically like a retro gameplay, but with like a shallow but modernized franchise mode where you have to like deal with like player egos. You have to deal with like making sure you're upgrading your stadium properly, like attracting fans in, and like a loss will make it so you have fewer fans. And like, I started my team and it was like, all right, or I started my game and it's like, all right, who's your favorite team? And I chose Baltimore because I'm a big Ravens fan. And, it's not the NFL license, but they do have all of like the team colors and team cities and
They
everything.
have the bird team.
Well, there's no logos or anything. It's just like, all right, this is Baltimore. You can even change the team names if you want to have it be like, instead of Baltimore, have it be, it's like very old school in that regard. And then when you're managing a team, you can change all the player names and everything. So yeah, they lean into it like, all right, we don't have the license, but if you really want to make it so this is like an NFL game, you can.
Right. And
I love that, like, I was like, do you want to start with your favorite team? And I said, yeah, I'd love to control Baltimore. And then it's like, they're a pretty good team. We recommend, if you want an interesting story, to control like a worse team. So, and then it just put me on like one of the teams and instead, and I was like, all right, yeah. And like, I guess like as my career will progress, it's going to make it so that I am able to get better job opportunities and stuff. So it's a very fun, satisfying game. And it's only $5, which is incredible. It's just great value. It seems like when compared to other games that are higher price points, like Mario Strikers, like Nintendo Switch Sports, that are higher price points and also had like kind of a lacking amount of content, Retro Bowl seems to deliver like just unbelievable value in terms of like the amount of bang for your buck that you're getting. And also Retro Goal is a kind of like an honorable mention in this category. You could go either way with this because Retro Goal, same concept, only with soccer. And they're both very good games, but Retro Bowl is the one that takes home the award this year. So, Kyle, we're going to move on to the next category. This is another wide-reaching category here. This is best indie game. And this is an interesting one because a lot of really awesome indie titles came to Switch this year. I mean, again, last episode was the eShop Gems of the Year with I had Jill Grote on. We covered 40 games, 40 incredible indie games that we wanted to recommend people check out that came to Switch in 2022. And we still had extras to spare, but we were like, we've got to cut this off. This is the longest episode of All Things Nintendo ever. So I had to narrow that list down to 5 indie games that are going to be nominated for the best indie game of 2022. And here are the nominees, Kyle. Cult of the Lamb, Inscription, Neon White, Nobody Saves the World, and Tunic. It's a real murderer's row there.
So Inscription, that was one that came to Switch this year.
December 1st of 2022. And the winner is Neon White. All right, so Neon White, it is undeniably an incredible game. It's a fast-paced shooter. It's a single-player shooter, which is kind of remarkable in this day and age. You're going through and basically trying to complete these levels as fast as you can, highest score as possible. You're given like kind of cards in your hand that are kind of like your loadout. But it's really the vibe about this game that makes it special. And the feeling of platforming across these areas, destroying these enemies as fast as possible with the wide array of weapons, it makes it for something that you just want to keep trying over and over again to get the higher score. And the leaderboards do an excellent job of encouraging that. Kyle, have you played Neon White at all?
Yeah, it's also, to its credit, is like a game where you kind of hear how it works and it's all about high speed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, well, probably shouldn't play this on Switch, right? And it's like, no, actually the Switch version is totally solid. Like, it seems like they almost like were pushing to make it for Switch first, and then they also ported it to PC, and then recently PlayStation 5. But yeah, I played it on Switch, and it felt great, looked great.
Yeah, I would recommend using the Pro Controller if you're going to play Neon White on Switch, but did you use the Joy-Cons at all?
Yeah, I'm kind of like agnostic to controllers. I don't really have a problem with any controller. You know what I mean? Like, I suppose I have my preferences, but like I don't. It's fine. I
Wait,
can play
didn't
it on
you write
anything.
like the best controllers of all time article for us a few years ago?
Yeah, I was assigned that. But I mean, generally, in terms of like Joy-Con versus Pro, like I'm fine either way. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I don't really. I don't know. It's all personal preference ultimately.
That's fair. I think that for shooter games in particular, I need to have like an actual trigger, which the Joy-Cons just are unable to deliver. But yes, Neon White plays very well on Switch, and it launched simultaneously with the PC version on Switch. It just recently came to PlayStation, which means that it probably was developed with the Switch in mind, and the PC version plays very well from what I understand too. But Neon White is a great game to play on Switch, and so are all the games in this category. Like Inscription, I'm so happy that's on Switch now. Tunic is tailor-made for Switch, but something about Neon White just makes it stand out among the crowd. And that's why it takes home our Best Indie Game Award for this podcast. Kyle, we're moving on to another one that has a pretty solid lineup here. That is the Best Multiplayer category. And the nominees for this are Fall Guys, Kirby's Dream Buffet, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Splatoon 3, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. And the winner for this category is Splatoon 3. All right, Kyle. So Splatoon 3, the long-awaited third entry in the Splatoon franchise. I am always a defender of the single-player content in Splatoon, but the multiplayer is just always going to be the main attraction. I've kind of given up in thinking that, all right, people like the multiplayer, they're going to check out the single-player. But talk to me about why the multiplayer of Splatoon 3 is so good.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of the flippant way to talk about it is like, well, it's more Splatoon, right? It's it's you're gonna be, if you've played one or two, then you kind of know what you're getting, and that's fair, I think. But like, there's also just enough new stuff and like little quality of life improvements that like it earns the number three. It doesn't feel like Splatoon 2.5 or anything like that. But it's just, it's Nintendo's take on a shooter, and it's like so unique. There's really nothing like it, and I admire it for that reason.
Yeah, and it does just kind of do everything that Splatoon 2 did, but better, but in a meaningful way. Like it has
Yeah,
all like the maps from Splatoon 1 and 2. Or not all of them, but a lot of the maps from Splatoon 1 and 2. It has all the modes from Splatoon 1 and 2. So, you have Salmon Run, which is the cooperative wave-based multiplayer. You have Turf Wars and all the different like subsets of that. And then the single player, which, isn't really a part of this category, but it's all there. And then you have the card battling game, which I forget what it's called.
yeah, I didn't
But
get into that, but that's
Table Turf
interesting.
Battles, I believe.
Table turf battles.
And it's fun, but like the competitive multiplayer suite is where it's at, and they do such a great job of iterating on the modes that were so well liked in Splatoon 1 and 2. And then Salmon Run, which I think is an often overlooked mode, but I think it's mostly because Splatoon 2's Salmon Run was so inaccessible due to like the fact that it was just constantly like in rotation of like, all right, can you even play this mode right now? They made it available 24/7 in Splatoon 3, and it's just a terrific mode to jump in with friends whenever you want, as opposed to like having to schedule an appointment with your friends to play. Like I don't know how many
Yeah.
times you actually schedule like an appointment to play with friends. It's for me, it's always just like, hey, what are you doing? Do you want to jump on right now? Because that is just kind of the way life works for me anyway.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like they tried something, right, making it like a scheduled kind of event to sort of make it feel special, but it's just like, nah, it doesn't work. That's not how people consume games.
It's not how people consume media these days. Like it used to be like you'd go on and like, all right, my favorite TV show is on at 9 o'clock. And then it like with the advent of streaming, it has become like, all right, I'm going to watch this show when I want to watch it.
Yeah, totally.
TV shows and like entertainment fits into your schedule, not vice versa at this point in our lives. So
Absolutely.
that multiplayer is rock solid in Splatoon 3. I recommend everybody check out Splatoon 3 if you've not jumped on that train yet. And that is why it wins our best multiplayer category. So, Kyle, we have a decent amount of more categories to get to here. So, we're going to keep it rolling here. We've got best compilation, which, again, one that I considered cutting. And then I looked at all of the options and possibilities that we have. And it's a robust category. So, I
All right.
narrowed it down to 5. And here are the nominees: Atari 50, the Anniversary Celebration, Capcom Fighting Collection, Pac-Man Museum Plus, Sonic Origins, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Cowabunga Collection. And the winner for best compilation is Atari 50: The Anniversary Celebration. So, Kyle, as I mentioned, this is a pretty full category. But even so, I don't think it was even a closely contested category. And that's because I wholeheartedly believe Atari 50, the Anniversary Celebration, is probably the best compilation that's ever been created. And I'm not saying that from a games perspective. Like, from a games perspective, a lot of the old Atari games haven't aged particularly well. However, the amount of care put in by Digital Eclipse, who developed this in conjunction with Atari, is just immense. Like, it's I would say not even half and half like compilation and digital museum. I would say like the main attraction for this is the virtual museum experience, where you can go through a timeline and experience like interviews that they did with a lot of the original designers. You can see like old TV ads, magazine clippings, like old reviews of these games from like newspapers and like stories. And it's just incredible to see like just all this stuff. And then once you watch the interview about like, all right, well, here's how this game was like designed, and like here's what we were thinking, and why like adventure was a thing that like why it was so influential. You could hear like I believe Tim Schafer's in it, Cliff Bleszinski's in it, talking about why like adventure was such an important milestone in gaming. You can read about like the article about like why like the Easter egg is created through adventure. And then after you read all these things and watch all these interviews about why this game is so important, you can actually go in and play the game. And that is why it's so cool. And then on top of that, there's like the Atari Jaguar is finally accessible, even though like, that wasn't a success by any stretch of the imagination. But the fact that you can play all these games, it's such a historical accomplishment to celebrate 50 years with more than 100 games included in this compilation.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like the right way to approach anything comparable in the future. It's nice to have a collection of like, oh yeah, here's like 100 Atari games that you can check out, but to have context is fantastic.
Yeah, and again, it's not so much about the games, but they also created new games that carry on the spirit of the original Atari. The original Atari library. Like they had, there's a game called Vector Sector, which is an all new game by Digital Eclipse, but you could tell these guys were raised on Atari. So they made like basically like a multi-game game out of like these Atari. So like starts off, it's like asteroids. And then you have to land the ship on like a mountain. And then next thing you know, it's like a 3D action game. And it's all like one cohesive experience. And then they reimagined Yar's Revenge and all these other titles that they created. Like, here's a game that they designed, and it was a sequel to this other Atari game. We actually used those design documents to create that Atari game that never came out. And it's like so wild that they did all this stuff in addition to bringing over all these old Atari games that, just weren't even available on modern platforms. So that's why Atari 50th Anniversary Celebration wins Best Compilation, despite all those other compilations being terrific. I think the Cowabunga collection in particular is an excellent thing. And that, by the way,
I wanted to give that a
by
shout out, by the way. I really liked the Cowabunga collection this year. Really thorough. Just like they have so much stuff in there for even the most niche Ninja Turtle game. It's impressive.
And it's by the same developer, by the way, Digital Eclipse.
Yeah.
And so they had a great
Shout
year
out Chris
for
Kohler.
compilations. Yeah. And so, Kyle, that is the best compilation category. We're going to move on to kind of an adjacent category, and that is the best remake or remaster. So the nominees for this are Chrono Cross, the Radical Dreamers Edition, Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, Live Alive, Pac-Man World Repack, and Tactics Ogre Reborn. And the winner of this category is Live Alive. So Kyle, Live Alive is a game that came out only in Japan back in the 90s, and it was reborn on the Switch. It was one of those most unexpected announcements from Square Enix. I believe it was on a Nintendo Direct last year in 2021, and it came out this past summer, and it was a pretty surprising hit. Like, I think that a lot of people played this game and they found a lot to like about this game, where it's telling these divergent tales of, or I guess convergent tales, but like they start in very different areas of world history. Like there's one that's you're a caveman, there's one that's you're in the Wild West, there's one that you're in feudal Japan, and then there's even ones that are in the future, and they all come together in a meaningful way. And it seems like a terrific blueprint for how we can remake these kind of either niche or completely lost games in some cases for modern platforms if they want to kind of try to give them new life.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that this thing exists. I do like it. Yeah.
And did you have a chance to play a whole lot of it?
Yeah, I played like the first hour of one of the stories. I actually played like almost all. The only one I didn't play on this list was Tactics Ogre. Weirdly, I played through all of Chrono Cross, played through all of Crisis Core, played some Live Alive, played some Pac-Man. Yeah, it's one I want to go back to as like a Chrono Trigger fan. It's kind of like certainly not a sequel or related to Chrono Trigger in any way, but like a lot of the same folks worked on it. They kind of were like, in the same sort of circle, kind of.
Yeah, you should absolutely play Live Alive. It is terrific, and it's an interesting relic from the past. Is like this is a really cool game that it's almost shocking it never came to the West. Like, yeah, it's a weird concept, and like maybe people may have not gotten to it, like stuck to it the way they do in 2022. But I think people would have liked it even back in what was it, '94? I think it originally came out in Japan. I'm not entirely sure on that, but
Yeah.
yeah, it seems like this is a game that people would have enjoyed back then. So it's shocking that it didn't come out, but it's even more shocking, I think, that we got a remake of it in 2022.
And it looks cool. It like looks awesome. Like I don't know if we made that clear. It's like, the sort of Octopath approach, and it looks
Yeah, like the
great.
HD 2D style almost. I don't know if it's like officially HD 2D like the way Octopath is, but or Triangle Strategy, but yes, Live Alive is very much in that style in terms of like kind of like the HD pixels approach. And yeah, it's one of my favorite games on the Switch all year, and it is as good as this category is. I think it was kind of a slam dunk for best remake or remaster. All right, Kyle, we have an interesting category here, which is best content updates. So, as we know, in the year 2022, Kyle, there is just because a game comes out doesn't mean that is the only experience that you will have with that game. And I was kind of kicking around like, all right, well, do we do this category? And then I looked again and I was like, oh, we absolutely have to do this category. So here are the nominees for best content updates: Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Monster Hunter Rise, Nintendo Switch Sports, Pokemon Unite, and Splatoon 3. And the winner of best content updates goes to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. So, Kyle, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe came out in 2017. It's the highest selling Switch game of all time, one of the highest selling video games of all time, period, at this point, if you count a single SKU.
Oh yeah.
And Nintendo finally decided to like capitalize on that. We are 3 waves deep into the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, which is doubling the number of courses. So that means we've added 50% more courses already this year alone. And then that's going to continue through the end of 2023. So this could be a repeat winner if it keeps up at this pace when it comes down to 2023's content calendar. But the updates that we got specifically zeroed in on 2022 were impressive. We got a wide swath of fan favorites, in addition to kind of introducing console players and kind of mainline Mario Kart players to the Mario Kart Tour levels, which I think are some of the better courses in modern Mario Kart, which is interesting because I didn't expect that. I expected this to be all about the nostalgia, and what I got instead was, oh, Mario Kart Tour actually has some cool courses. I'm glad they're coming to a game that's not all about like touchscreen controls and microtransactions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I haven't touched all the new courses yet. I did the first batch, but I haven't done the second or third batch. But yeah, it's wild. I mean, this is like borderline Mario Kart 9, like to a certain degree.
100%.
It's cool.
And it's such good content updates. And you look at it, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, like I said, came out in 2017. You look at the other nominees in this category, they either came out this year or in the last year and the preceding year and a half. So it's wild that they were just like, oh yeah, we're 5 years deep into Mario Kart 8 Deluxe's lifespan. Let's do a giant batch of TLC and free updates. Because remember, it's not just the courses. They also added item select recently with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is, I think, a huge thing that they borrowed from the Super Smash Bros. Series. That's been a mainstay in Smash for pretty much its entire lifespan. And now we finally have that Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which is something that I think that people who despise things like the lightning bolt or like blue shells can relish in.
You just lets you remove them? Is that what?
Yeah, you can
or
choose
pick
which items are appearing in item boxes.
Oh, that's nice.
That's a free update that came with Wave 3 earlier this month.
Yeah,
and that I mean
cool.
that you don't even have to have the booster course pass for that. That's just available to all Mario Kart 8 Deluxe owners. If you haven't updated your game lately, then I would recommend doing that, even if you aren't a booster course pass subscriber. So yeah, it's just an incredible feat that they are keeping this game alive, capitalizing on how popular it is, and it is, I think it was a pretty easy pick for best content updates, even when you have things like Splatoon 3 putting out seasonal updates, even when you have Nintendo Switch Sports adding an entirely new sport into their catalog with golf. And Pokemon Unite is just a constant train of updates and new playable characters. But like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, it is the king of Switch for a reason. All right, so we're going to move on to the next category, which is a little, it's the Better Late Than Never award, Kyle. And
yeah, all right, I see where this is going already. Yeah,
this is a category for, there's a lot of times, and I think this is maybe true for the Steam Deck era, where everybody was like, oh, this game is so good, it would be amazing on Switch. 2022 gave us almost all the games that I feel like people have been wanting on Switch for so many years. And this is why I had to create this category, because there were so many games where it's like, oh, this would be awesome on Switch. I hope it comes one day. And then 2022, all of them came. So here are the nominees for the Better Late Than Never award. Inscription, It Takes Two, Nier Automata, No Man's Sky, and Persona 5 Royal. And the winner of the Better Late Than Never award is Persona 5 Royal. Okay, Kyle. So as I mentioned, this is a jam-packed category. But I think that when, and actually this is in line with, I'm looking at our award winners last year, and the winner for Most Wanted Game for Switch was also Persona 5. So I guess that checks out that, like, the Most Wanted Game for Switch was Persona 5. Persona 5 came to Switch, so it wins the Better Late Than Never award, and I think that's in line. But the rest of this category is no slouch. I mean, we talked about Inscription and the eShop Gems of the Year last episode. It Takes Two won Game of the Year at the Game Awards last year. And then Nier Automata is kind of right there with like one of the most loved games of last generation for any platform, and Persona 5 is in there as well. But No Man's Sky, like it's so amazing that you can kind of now carry around basically an entire procedurally generated universe in your luggage if you're going to the airport. Like, that is wild to me. Like, yeah, it's cool to have like an RPG, but like, to say this basically what I'm saying is to say this category is hotly contested is an understatement. This might be the most hotly contested category of all of the categories in this year's awards. But Persona 5 Royal is the clear winner for me. And talk to me about why this game was a perfect fit for Switch.
Well, it's one of those games that's like, since it came out, it's almost been like, why this needs to be on Switch, because it was originally released as like a PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 game, if I'm not mistaken. I think the PS3 version only came out in Japan, but it's like there's no technical reason as far as I know that this couldn't be on Switch. And like, to have a big old RPG like that's like not really action focused, it just seems like a great fit for like a handheld. And it was, and then like, Joker ended up in Smash Brothers, and the sort of the sequel, right? The so to speak, Strikers is on Switch, but then not the original wasn't. It was just overdue more than anything else.
It's kind of like the last time you were on All Things Nintendo, and I was like, well, Crisis Core is like kind of this prequel to the Final Fantasy VII saga, and like Remake isn't on Switch, and it was kind of like this whole thing of like, all right, we got the sequel to Persona 5 Royal. Why is Persona 5 Royal not on Switch?
Yeah,
like, it's so weird that you could play, but like Persona 5 Royal, I will wholeheartedly and like unabashedly say it's one of my top 3 RPGs of all time. It's like up there with 2 other games that are on Switch, which is Final Fantasy X and the original Pokemon games. Well, I guess the original Pokemon games are kind of on Switch in that, the Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee titles. But it's so nice to have. I'd rather it have be like Fire Red Leaf Green, to be honest. But Persona 5 Royal, it's a perfect fit for Switch. It's a great game to just kind of like, it I don't know, it's just something about it screams Switch vibes. And also maybe it's the fact that like a lot of the handheld Persona games used to be exclusive to Switch. Like, we would get like kind of the spin-offs exclusively on Switch. Like the Persona Q series was only on, or not Switch, 3DS.
Yeah, I know what you meant. Yeah.
And but like the mainline Persona games were only on PlayStation for the longest time. And I'm so glad to see that maybe that is changing, because, early next year, like in January, we're getting Persona 3 and Persona 4 on Switch as well, which is amazing to know that is on the horizon as well. But if you haven't played Persona 5 Royal, now's as good a time as any. And, Switch, this is a Nintendo podcast, but it's also on Game Pass. So if you haven't checked out Persona 5 Royal, there are 2 amazing options for you. And it's the Better Late Than Never award was basically made for Persona 5 Royal. However, the rest of this category is also incredible.
Yeah, just set aside, 120 hours? You should be good.
Yeah, that's the downside to Persona 5 is that it is just a ridiculously long game. Kyle, we have 3 awards left, and that last award kind of segs directly into our next one, which is the most wanted game for Switch. And as I mentioned in the last award, a lot of the games that we wanted on Switch prior to 2022 actually came to Switch in 2022. So this was kind of a difficult one to put together, but I found 5 games that I would love to see appear on Switch in the future. And here are the nominees: Kena Bridge of Spirits, Mass Effect Legendary Edition, Roller Drome, Vampire Survivors, and Yakuza Like a Dragon. And the winner for Most Wanted Game for Switch, Vampire Survivors. Kyle, if I'm being honest, it's kind of wild to me that Vampire Survivors didn't come to Switch alongside the Xbox port, because it's just, again, the graphics, the gameplay, everything seems to, the bite-sized gameplay sessions, if you have restraint, everything feels so tailor-made for kind of like the hybrid console handheld experience, and especially the Nintendo audience with kind of the NES, like in between 8 and 16-bit graphics. Like, you have been a proponent for Vampire Survivors for longer than I've played it. I've recently become obsessed with this game, and I would love an on-the-go version that isn't on my phone, because it did come to mobile devices recently as well. But the Switch version, it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, I joked for a long time that my Steam Deck was my Vampire Survivors machine. Like, that's where I fell in love with Vampire Survivors, was playing it on my Steam Deck, because it just feels so good to play, at most 30 minutes. Well, obviously you can play longer than that if you want. You can go for a couple runs, but like one really good successful run, if you've done the best you can, is about 30 minutes. And like, it just felt so great on Steam Deck. And I would love to have it on Switch, just to have it on that smaller, more comfortable handheld. Mm-hmm. It's a like quietly sophisticated game, right? Like, when you're getting into that 30-minute zone and it is like, there's a lot happening on screen, I wonder how the Switch would be able to handle it. And I say that as someone who does not make video games and doesn't know about the process of making video games, really. Mm-hmm. So like, I wonder if there's some limitation there, but I also, it's a small team. They probably had a bunch of people vying for their attention. Xbox won. Xbox wrote the biggest check, probably. But yeah, the fact that there is a mobile version on iOS and I think Android as well makes me hope that it'll come to Switch at some point. I'd love to play it on Switch. It would be a perfect fit there.
It's so good. And I'm glad that you and our freelance reviewer, Brian Vore, turned me on to this game, because I'll find myself where it's like, all right, I want to play more of game X. Like I'm currently trying to play more of Midnight Suns or God of War Ragnarok. And I'll be like, well, let me do a couple runs of Vampire Survivors first. And then that's always a mistake, because I'll play it for like 3 hours. And then I'm like, oh, well, I don't have time to play those other games now.
My funny Vampire Survivors story is, it came to Xbox. My wife was like looking for something to play. And I was like, yeah, I think you would like this. Like, I don't know. It could go either way. And she played it for like 10 minutes and she's like, so people like this, right? Like, very dismissively. She's like, people like this game? And I like walked away, did like a load of dishes or something, and came back. And she's like, okay, I like this now. Like,
it's once you start getting those updates,
it clicks in a big way at some point. It's like, once you understand what's happening, you're like, oh yeah, this is good.
Basically, the elevator pitch for people who, because this is a very Nintendo focused podcast, so like people may not know what Vampire Survivors even is. It's like a retro style bullet hell game where you're just a single character walking around and there's hordes of monsters coming at you, and you start off with one single attack. So like for one guy, it's a whip, like Castlevania style whip. One guy throws like daggers. He'll throw one single dagger in the direction you're looking. Then as you defeat enemies, and by the way, the attacks auto fire, and the only control that you're using in gameplay anyway is a single analog stick.
Yeah,
So you're just steering the guy around,
it
basically.
looks like a twin stick shooter. Like if you look at screenshots and stuff, you think, oh, it's a twin stick shooter, but it's really like a single stick shooter. It's weird.
Yeah, all the attacks auto fire.
Yeah.
So you're doing that, you're defeating enemies, you pick up the gems that they drop. And then as you pick up gems, your character levels up. There's a bar at the top of the screen that fills up, and when you reach the top, your character levels up. And then each time you level up, you get a choice of a new attack or a new ability. Sometimes the ability are like, all right, you get better luck, which will improve your drops. Sometimes it'll be like, all right, that attack you already have, you can upgrade it to have like an extra projectile or like a shorter cooldown, do more damage. And other times you can just flat out add an extra attack. So like, all right, you have the whip. Now you can add you can add a dagger or like a magic wand that'll like attack the nearest enemy, or the most overpowered attack, which is the garlic, which just gives you like kind of like a protective barrier around yourself, where if enemies come near you, they get damaged, and it takes out basically any like one hit point enemies automatically, which is very, very strong. And then as you keep leveling up, you keep adding more abilities and more attacks and more like skill attribute boosts, and you become like a more unstoppable killing machine. But they also throw more difficult enemies, thicker hordes of enemies, more difficult situations. So the strategy and the difficulty of this game comes in building the best loadout for your guy as you upgrade him throughout like the various levels. And my runs typically last somewhere between 10 and 12 minutes, but as Kyle said, you can reach up to 30 minutes if you like really are strategic about how you upgrade your character and how you move them around the screen, how you pick up power-ups that are dropped, because there's also like some that will freeze all the enemies on screen, or it will make it so you have like a flamethrower temporarily. Like there's all these pickups, there's health pickups and everything. But yes, it is very much just you're controlling a single stick, moving them around, and then build the fun comes in building the best unstoppable killing machine that you can.
Yeah, just a great build.
Yeah, it's very it sinks its hooks into you, and then you start being like, all right, I'm not playing this game. It's one of those games where you're not playing it, but you're thinking about playing it. Like
Yes,
kind of like how
absolutely.
Tetris or Guitar Hero, you'd close your eyes and you'd see the either the note highway of Guitar Hero or the Tetris blocks dropping in their lanes. That's kind of like how Vampire Survivors gets at a certain point. And yeah, it's one of the best games of 2022, and it would be an amazing fit for Switch. All right, Kyle, we have reached the heavy hitter categories. These are kind of like the two competing Game of the Year awards for the individual categories. So the first one is Best Third Party Game. So this is the best game that came to Switch by a developer other than Nintendo. And the nominees are Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope, Neon White, Overwatch 2, Sonic Frontiers, and Tunic. And the winner for Best Third Party Game on Switch of 2022 is Neon White. All right, Kyle, we already talked about why Neon White is such a great game when it won Best Indie Game, but did you foresee it winning Best Third Party Game of 2022?
Having just heard the list just now, I actually thought maybe it would lean Mario Rabbids. But I like Neon White more between those two, so I think you made the right call. I'm proud of you.
Neon White, it's very tough to say anything against Mario plus Rabbids Sparks of Hope. I think that's a terrific game, and it's also very funny that we'd say best third-party game, and the very first word out of my mouth is Mario.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that's a Ubisoft-developed game. I think that's a pretty solid second choice in this category. But Neon White, just supremely satisfying to hit that high score, hit that speed run that you've been dying to hit. And, it's a terrific title to play on Switch, and I think it's a solid pick for best third-party game. Anything else you want to say about Neon White that we haven't already said when it won best indie game?
No, we nailed it. It's good.
All right, so I have a feeling you know what the final category is now that you've heard the second to last category, and that is best Nintendo game. So as the name indicates, this is the best game that was kind of created by Nintendo. And, there are some other developers in this. I mean, I think only one of these games was actually developed by Nintendo. The other ones were kind of just published or created in partnership with Nintendo. The nominees for the best Nintendo game are Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Pokemon Legends Arceus, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Splatoon 3, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Ooh, it's a jam-packed category, and wild
Yeah,
that we
it's a
have two
good year.
Pokemon games in it. The winner for best Nintendo game is Pokemon Legends Arceus. Kyle, Pokemon Legends Arceus, it kicked off 2022. It was the first major AAA release of the year, and I maintain it's the best game that came to Nintendo platforms in 2022. Talk to me about why Pokemon Legends Arceus is such a great game.
Well, I think Kirby and the Forgotten Land was just fantastic game. I'm sorry, did you say Pokemon Arceus?
So I take it you disagree with my pick here then.
Yeah, but I don't have any problem with Pokemon Arceus. I liked Arceus. I the thing that I like about Arceus is kind of how is sort of can't be done without the legacy of Pokemon, if that makes sense, right? Like the fact that it mixes things up so much but still kind of feels mainline. I mean, it's kind of like, before it came out, it was like, oh, is this spinoff or is this mainline? And I feel like Arceus is like kind of hits that mainline Pokemon appeal, but doing something completely different and unique for the series. And it let you see Pokemon in kind of a whole new way, which I kind of ultimately preferred. Seeing in Scarlet and Violet, I think was like the better version of it personally. But yeah, Arceus is cool and interesting for sure. I think it's a solid pick. It's an interesting pick.
Yeah, and it was the thing that made it set out for me, aside from the fact that it performed better technically than Scarlet and Violet, was that it just changed up the formula in so many ways that I loved. Like, I know everybody, when they first heard it or first heard the trailer, they were like, oh, they're doing the Breath of the Wild thing. And there are elements of Breath of the Wild that I think influenced Pokemon Legends Arceus. But like, there's so many aspects of it that it feels like a Pokemon game. It looks like a Pokemon game, but it also expands the formula in so many smart ways and really set the table for, I think, the future of the franchise. And we saw some things carry over into Scarlet and Violet. Other things were kind of left by the wayside, which, Scarlet and Violet is the true next mainline entry. Pokemon Legends Arceus was kind of like a detour spin-off title, which, even though it felt more like a mainline title than other spin-off titles in the Pokemon franchise, but it did so many things so smartly. And I sincerely hope we get like another Pokemon Legends game in the near future, like maybe focusing on another legend. Like, imagine if they like just started doing, like, because like, this was very much like based on Gen 4 games, right? Like where
Right.
we got Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl that same or just before this, so you got to play like the remakes or remasters of the Gen 4 games, and then this was kind of like a prequel with the Hisui region being kind of the region that preceded the Sinnoh region. And now I would love to see other ones where it's like, all right, let's go to Kanto and do Pokemon Legends. I don't know, maybe they do Pokemon Legends Mew, something like that, where it's like, all right, this is Kanto before it was the Kanto region, and you're building the first Pokedex of the Kanto region. That would be a really cool twist to continue this spin-off kind of sub-franchise of the greater Pokemon franchise. And it would be awesome to see that. I mean, I also said that about the Let's Go games, where it's like, it'd be cool if we did Let's Go Johto next, but we haven't done that yet, and it's been 5 years. So who knows what's going to happen, or 4 years. But Pokemon Legends Arceus, I think was my game of the year for a long time overall. And it only recently got beat out by God of War Ragnarok for my favorite game of 2022, period. So with that in mind, it was a no-brainer for me to consider Pokemon Legends Arceus the best Nintendo game of 2022. Kyle, any parting shots for this category before we take a quick break?
No, I don't think so, man. I think we got it. Kirby got its due earlier, so Kirby's all set.
Well, Kyle, we're going to take our only break of this episode, and when we get back, we are going to close out with definitive ranking and eShop Gem of the Week. We will be right back. We are back, and it is time for Definitive Ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our personal top 5 lists. Kyle, normally I will include our guests in this segment, but I'm actually going to kind of take the reins here and just give my top 5, because I think that it would be maybe too close to each other if we did our own individual top 5 lists. So I'll just let you jump into mine. Since we are celebrating Pokemon Legends Arceus as the best Nintendo game of 2022 for all things Nintendo, I am going to give my top 5 innovations that I loved about this game. So I'm going to start at 5, count it down to 1, and give you a quick sentence about each. Number 5, I'm just going to throw it out there. It's something that carried over to Scarlet and Violet, the traversal. The Pokemon franchise has always kind of been like, all right, you can walk at first, then you can run, then you get a bike, and then eventually you can like maybe swim on your Pokemon or get a Pokemon to fly or whatever. Legends Arceus opened it up a lot, where you could get these special Pokemon and like you could actually like climb up a mountain or glide far distances with your Braviary. And they did such a great job of like just you with a press of a button, you're suddenly like climbing up a mountain or swimming through a lake
or sitting in a box and like staring out of the back.
Yeah, that was also very strange when what you're talking about. God, what was the Sneasel evolution?
Yeah, I like it though. It was weird.
Yeah, so that is the number 5 reason that I loved Pokemon Legends Arceus. Number 4, stealth encounters. So being able to sneak up on a Pokemon in these open segments of the Hisui region and throw a Pokeball either to catch them or kind of catch them off guard. Again, they kind of brought this over to Scarlet and Violet, but it was more fully realized in Pokemon Legends Arceus.
It's a wholly unique way to play Pokemon. I mean, I guess like Pokemon Go is maybe like the closest sort of thing you could relate to it, where it's just like just catch as much as you can, throw Pokeballs like crazy, just go for it.
The way that I described Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee was Game Freak took the wrong lessons from Pokemon Go's success when making Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. With Legends Arceus, I think they learned the right lessons. And that was, like you said, like just catch all the Pokemon and then this will fill out your Pokedex. And that's awesome. And that's a great lesson to take, because they saw how much people love filling up their Pokedex in Pokemon Go. So to have that kind of carry over in a meaningful way in Legends Arceus, as opposed to like, oh, people love dragging their finger across a touchscreen and throwing the ball at Pokemon. Like, no, we don't. That's not why we like Pokemon Go. But that's what they wanted us to do at Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee.
Right.
And that's why it's kind of a letdown in my eyes. But number 3, Kyle, boss battles against Pokemon as a trainer. That was a really cool thing that caught me off guard. Like when you found these kind of like these enraged Pokemon at the end of a given area, you had to actually like dodge roll out of the way of their attacks. Like they're actually attacking you and you can be defeated as a trainer. It's not just like, oh, my Pokemon fainted, I'm going to white out now. It's like, no, you are actually being physically attacked by a Pokemon. I thought that was something really cool, that like there was actually like real-time boss battles that took place in a Pokemon game. And then you could send out your Pokemon once they were weak enough to do like a traditional battle to finish them off.
Yeah, so like just turns into like an action game for a moment, which is interesting.
Yeah, that was something that I would love to see carried forward in future entries, but did not carry over to Scarlet and Violet in any way. Number 2, this is something that was further innovated from Sword and Shield's wild areas. And that's just having big open areas to explore. The wild areas of Sword and Shield felt kind of vanilla. Like you just would go around and like it just didn't feel like a living area. It was like, it felt like you were in like a lobby of an online game, right? Where it's like, all right, I'm killing time. There's some Pokemon wandering around. I can go throw a Pokeball at them and battle them if I want to. This was the first time that it actually felt like you were exploring like a living, breathing area. And that was obviously taken to heart with Scarlet and Violet, because that was the entire game, was exploring a big open world. But Legends Arceus was it was the first game in the Pokemon, like, I know we called it a spin-off, but like kind of like the mainline DNA RPG of the Pokemon franchise to implement open areas in this way, and it did it in really effective fashion, and I'm glad that they did, and I like the approach that they took with it.
I agree. Yeah, it was kind of it was almost like a rough draft for Scarlet and Violet, to a certain degree, right? And then Scarlet and Violet was still a pretty rough draft, but but, I liked it as well. Yeah.
And then the number one reason, or the number one innovation that I loved about Pokemon Legends Arceus was when you're filling out your Pokedex, it actually felt like you were researching these creatures. Like you were going around, like you caught a, say you caught a Pikachu. It's like, all right, I caught a Pikachu. It adds the entry to my Pokedex, but now I actually have to like watch it do stuff. Like I can't just be like, all right, my entry's completely filled out. No, you have to like watch it like do Thundershock 5 times, or knock out 8 other Pokemon, or have it do this or have it do that. Like, you know, like you actually had to do stuff and observe it, and felt like you were actually researching this to fill out the Pokedex entries. And I thought that was something so cool. And I was bummed to see that not carry over in some way into Scarlet and Violet. Like, did you enjoy that segment of Pokemon Legends Arceus?
Not as much as you, but I don't think I really contextualized it as like research. And I think if I had, I would have liked it a lot more because it felt almost like busy work to me, right? But when
Yeah,
you
okay.
contextualize it in like it's a chance to like, sort of role play the being a sort of researcher on the Pokemon, it's like, you know what? That actually like convinces me. Like that's actually a really interesting way to approach it that I didn't really think of, honestly. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It also kind of explains why you're sort of pushed to like catching a lot of the same Pokemon and stuff like that, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
like in a traditional Pokemon game, it's like you want to build your team, you want to catch one Pikachu because you want a good electric type on your team. Where here it was like, no, 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 catch a lot of Pikachu so you can learn about Pikachu. And it's like, yeah, that you've convinced me. That was an interesting idea.
Well, the entire story of Pokemon Legends Arceus is you're building the first Pokedex of the Hisui region, so it makes sense that they would want you to complete these research tasks to learn more about these Pokemon, so they can have the most complete entry possible, right?
Oh, I thought the story was that you're from the future and you somehow landed in the past with a god cell phone. Was that not the story?
And then also like 2.5 hours of dialogue before you could do anything, which, by the way, is
Well,
the
that's
only
hey,
part of that game that I don't like.
ain't a
And
Pokemon game if you ain't, if you got a intro that takes entirely too long.
so, Kyle, that is the list of the top 5 innovations I loved about Pokemon Legends Arceus. Is there anything else you want to say about Legends Arceus before we move on to our final segment of 2022?
No, cool game. It's important, going to be important to the future of Pokemon in the sense that I think there will be, we'll have the main line Scarlet and Violets, and then I think we're also going to have, whatever they call it, I don't know, but the Arceuses. It'll probably be called something different, but
Probably Pokemon Legends.
right, yeah, Pokemon Legends : something, right?
That's what I'm saying. I'm crossing my fingers for Pokemon Legends Mew. How cool would that be?
And it also
Researching the
sounds like
Kanto region.
2, right? Pokemon Legends 2 Mew, nailed
Kyle,
it.
you did it. All right, Kyle, that brings us to the eShop Gem of the Week. Again, another one where I usually throw it to my guests, but I am going to give my eShop Gem of the Week pick here. It's a game that I actually discovered in a local arcade bar here in Minneapolis. It's called Switch and Shoot. And it is a game that, like, it's very rudimentary. It is a top-down space shooter game, and it's a single button. We talk about Vampire Survivors being a single stick game. This is a single button game. Basically, your ship is going back and forth, and it's shooting like, kind of like Space Invaders style, or Galaga. God, I can't talk. Galaga style, where you are bouncing back and forth, and every time you fire, you switch directions. So you're going left,
Oh,
you
okay.
press the fire button, you fire, but then you start going right. So you're going back and forth. You kind of have to develop this rhythm. And I was looking it up this morning, and I was like, what? This game's on Switch? I thought it was only in arcades. But no, it turns out at least a version of it. It looks a little bit visually different, but it's very retro style. It looks like an 80s arcade game. And it's only $5.40 or $4.59. And it came out in 2019, allegedly. I had no idea this was on Switch, and that's why I was so excited to like bring this to this episode.
Yeah, I'm looking at the trailer now. This looks cool. It kind of has like a reminds me of like Downwell a little bit or something. Like,
Yes, yes.
yeah, I'm gonna have to check this out. This seems very cool.
So it's an 8-bit game. There's 64 different color palettes you can choose from if like you don't like the default ones. But yeah, it's a game I had no idea was on Switch until this very morning, and I'm glad I found it out because I have it on my Switch now. Terrific arcade title. Highly recommend it. Again, less than $5. So what do you have to lose?
Nothing. Well, $5, I guess.
Yeah, I guess $5. But Kyle, thank you so much for joining me for this final 2022 episode of All Things Nintendo. I appreciate you coming on this podcast so much since you've rejoined the Game Informer crew, and I'm so happy you're back.
Oh, thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've enjoyed coming on. I like Nintendo. It's good.
Hey, you like Nintendo. I like Nintendo. We should talk about Nintendo more often. And, that is the final episode of All Things Nintendo for 2022. Thank you so much to everyone for listening. Do me a favor, if you haven't already, throw All Things Nintendo a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to get any comments or questions in, you can get in touch with me at allthingsnintendo@gameinformer.com or hit me up on Instagram at Brian P. Shea. My Twitter is currently disabled. I decided to take a break from it.
Why?
Stuff that's going
Why'd
on.
you do that?
Why did I do that? I don't know.
We don't have to get into
I don't know.
It's
It's
fine.
it's a nightmare of a platform, and it just seemed like it was getting worse and worse. So I temporarily, at least, deactivated my Twitter account. But I'm at Brian P. Shea on Instagram, and if you want to join me over on Hive, if you have Hive, that is another social media platform I am semi-active on right now. Maybe I'll be back on Twitter eventually if some things change. Maybe I won't be. Who knows? But
I'm on Post now, man. Post. I got in the beta or whatever.
Okay, well, maybe I'll check out Post as well. But either way, you can also join the Game Informer Community Discord, which is a perk for subscribing to the Game Informer Twitch channel, even just for 1 month. Kyle, tell everyone where they can find you on the internet.
Well, I'm going to cede my time and call out, because this is something I've been doing for you as a personal favor, Brian Shea, is I've been putting episodes of All Things Nintendo up on Game Informer's secondary YouTube channel, where we put stream archives and podcasts and stuff like that. So that's another place you can consume All Things Nintendo, and you can leave comments and stuff like that on those versions. I read those. I don't know if Brian does, but go check that out. And I'm going to keep doing that. I would like to have All Things Nintendo on YouTube every week.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate you doing that, and thank you for the peek behind the curtain, so people can know that, like, if they prefer to listen to their podcasts on YouTube, maybe it wasn't on YouTube for the first year and change, but now it is there. So if you like listening to podcasts on YouTube, that is now an option in addition to wherever you're currently listening to this podcast. And of course, if you want to find Kyle on social media, he doesn't like to talk about it, but you can look in the show notes of this very episode.
You can find, if you're looking for me, you can find me. I don't need to tell you that.
But that is our show for this week and the final episode of 2022. Thank you all again so much for listening. We will see you in 2023.